there's a sort of question as to what human consciousness is. Not only do I think it's plausible, but I think that it's undeniable that ghosts exist in some ways.
Ghosts exist in people's minds, not in the real world.
We tell stories. We come up with explanations. We like to feel as though we know what's going on in our world. It gives us that sense of control. And these explanations do get passed down. And when an explanation is in occurrence, then of course we're going to be looking for confirmation. Now, we don't know everything about our world, and as we learn more, we're going to adjust those stories. So yes, we now know what thunder is caused by, what lightning is, where millennia ago, or if we're talking about, say, like caveman times, they didn't have that explanation. But if one is searching for an explanation, they might say, oh, the gods are unhappy, right? This is some sort of punishment. We've done something wrong. And so perhaps life is about searching for explanations.
I feel like there's no way to feel like you're sane sometimes when you talk about this, but oh my god. I'm gonna look so crazy in this video. Oh well.
The first time I remember having an actual experience that I attributed to the paranormal, I had to be 10 or 11 years old.
I've never really experienced something personally before freshman year of college, which was really scary.
When I first came here in '87, we used to feel a lot of cold spots in those stairs. It would be perfectly warm like this, and then all of a sudden you take a step and it was like ice coming through you. And everybody knew there was something, but no one really wanted to talk about it a lot.
When I was younger, I think it was around like 7 or 8, I was sitting in my mom's bed and I saw somebody walk out of my room and walk down the hallway, and I got up and chased them, and I went to the kitchen where the hallway leads, and my mom and my brother were in there, and I said, did any of you come out of my room? And they said no, and I was like, what was that? I don't know what that was. So I'm kind of used to it. My whole family has experienced a lot of things in my house that I live in.
I think that the first time I ever had an experience that I couldn't rule it out as any other possibility, and I always do search for the first logical possibility. I never had that sort of experience before I came here. And I guess when I came here is when I sort of made up my mind that I really did believe in ghosts, because there was no explanation for what happened. My sister Alicia, my friend Cassie, my friend Jocelyn, my friend Shannon, big handful of friends, lived on the 7th floor of Fusik Hall. And first weird things, little things started happening. The first experience that I sort of recall having when I got to school here, I guess, when I was a freshman, was I had come back from like getting a sandwich or whatever, and I kept the door open and I sat on my bed and I heard a knock on the wall, and my friend Cassie lived on the other side of that wall, and so I went over to the wall and I knocked back and I heard this sound that was like this scraping, almost like it was coming from inside the wall rather than the other side. But I sort of thought, oh, maybe she's jumping off her bed to come and say hello to me like she would sometimes do, and that perhaps the bed frame was scraping against the wall. I didn't think much of it at the time, and I figured she'd be over in a sec to say hi. So I went and sat back down on the bed, and as I mentioned, my door was open, and then I hear the elevator ding, and Cassie comes out of the elevator.
I was walking towards my room and she walked out and she was just like freaking out, and I didn't know why she was freaking out at first.
I went over to her and I said, like, Cassie, you weren't in your room. And she said, no, of course not. Like, I just got off the elevator. And so I said, go see if your roommate's in, and then I'll tell you what I think I just heard.
Until I walked in the room and like she followed us in and was like looking around. She goes, your roommate's not here? And I'm like, no. And she goes, oh, because I was knocking on the wall and someone was knocking back or whatever. And I was like, oh my God. And we ran out of there and I like stayed out of my room for the whole day.
And that was the first big one that I remember, although I feel like there were a couple little things that happened. But that was my favorite for sure.
So just a little background. This building was built, this is the new section, but this section was built by Sanford Blackington. He was a local businessman and he had a lot of money. And he made a lot of it during the Civil War. His mills did cotton and wool and they were used for the Union soldiers. So with that, there was a house wars going on. Everybody was building the biggest and the best. Well, he built the biggest and the best. And the big mystery or the big occurrence in this building was a shellfish poisoning at a dinner. Sanford Blackington, his son William, who lived down the street where the Masonic Temple is now, the home that was there originally was his home. And they had many of their business partners and wives came for dinner. About 13 people suffered from shellfish poisoning. And William Blackington ended up suffering for 2 weeks and then dying.
I moved into Hoosick 618 on the 6th floor my freshman year, which was last year in the fall, with my roommate Kevin. And almost immediately within the first couple of weeks of school, weird things started happening. We started hearing noises. This year nobody lived on the 7th floor. And we'd hear banging up there, we'd hear footsteps in the rooms upstairs, even though the rooms were all locked.
Like every once in a while, I would notice that things like on my desk weren't where I left them. And at first I thought it was my roommate, but it wasn't, because I talked to her about it once.
I play guitar. I have a guitar that sits out on a stand. It would get strummed randomly even when the windows were closed.
Glasses would fall when they were like super far pushed in on the desk. They would fall onto the floor, but like fall perfectly, like wouldn't even make a sound. They would just like look over and the glasses were there.
Years ago, and I'm talking late 80s, early 90s, we had a lady who worked here. She was the reference librarian and she was a Wiccan. Lovely woman, absolutely lovely. We were up here attempting to put locks on doors and I opened the door and she stepped back and turned totally white. She said, I can't go in there. Obviously, if you were born in the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, if someone said to you, I'm a Wiccan, I'm a witch, you believed they were evil. So that would explain why this Marion couldn't go into that room.
Sometimes my pen would be on my desk and other times I would move it to a specific spot, like where I put all my pens, and sometimes I would find it like on a different desk, like on my dresser.
I do remember one time near the end of the year, things would kind of die down. It started getting slower as the year progressed. But I was hanging out with my friends and one of my friends' phones just like jumped off my bed across the room.
Sometimes like I'd hear shouting from the next room or someone laughing and I would text my neighbor and be like, oh, like what's going on, or are you okay or something, and she would text back and be like, I'm not home, and I'd be like, oh, okay, but it was like very clearly coming from the other room, because sometimes I even put like my ear against the wall and I would still hear people talking and it sounded like my neighbors, but they weren't there.
Several years ago, Mindy, the lady that was sitting at the reference desk, who was the director, allowed us to bring in some people to spend the night. So there were probably 4 local people, plus myself and my 2 sisters, who came to spend the night here. And they had the spirit box, and it was totally quiet. So several things happened.
There was the time where I thought my roommate was in the room because I heard someone say something and it sounded like my roommate. And I was laying in bed and I like asked her what she said and there was no response, and I wasn't wearing my glasses at the time, and I looked through the bookcase and I saw her and she was looking at me and I was like, what did you say? I didn't hear you. And there was no response, so I was like, are you okay? Like, can you hear me? And then I put my glasses on and I still like saw her, But then like I moved around on my bed to like look around the bookcase, and like there was literally no one there. Like she wasn't even in the room, and I didn't even know, and I freaked out and ran out of the room.
So does society need ghost stories? So I don't know so much as they need ghost stories, but they want ghost stories. So ghost stories exist in nearly every culture, and they have been around for thousands of years. Ghost stories and other stories of the supernatural, they serve to explain phenomena or events that cannot be explained, which is the same process as mythology.
I'm a scientist, and I'm a materialist, so I believe it if I see it. Like my science would not believe something that you didn't have evidence. So I don't start out with belief, I start out with disbelief, and then prove it.
I think anything's possible. I think in life, anything is truly possible. But for me, I am definitely a skeptic. I don't think that there truly is ghosts or paranormal activity. I think the unconscious mind is an incredible thing that convinces us that things are in existence, that science may say otherwise. But that's my personal belief.
I don't believe there are in the world entities that are ghosts, but I believe that people have ghost experiences.
If we talk about paranormal activity or ghosts, things like that from a psychological perspective, I think you'd need to break down psychology. So psychology is an incredibly broad field, right? We could talk about, yes, there are definitely individuals that see things, but it might be a case of psychopathology. So we might be talking about someone who has either a visual or an auditory hallucination that truly believes, and I would say you could argue that they are seeing and hearing people, what they might call spirits, etc.
And I think that's all a product of how they think about the world, how they perceive the world. It's their expectations, but it's not something that's in the world, it's something that's in their brain.
So I was waiting to meet my friend, and I was outside, and we were going to go for a walk. And I had gotten there early, and I'd been sitting outside for a little while, and I thought I'd go inside Mark Hopkins Hall just to use the bathroom, and I'd go back outside and meet my friend. So I walked down this hallway, and there was no one here. I don't know if classes were in session or if it was later than that. It was certainly at night. And I came in, I used the bathroom, and as I was coming out, I saw, sort of in my peripheral vision, but clearly saw a man sitting in a chair, that chair over there, in a puffy blue winter jacket. And he had gray hair. It wasn't old-timey clothes. He looked just like a normal dude. And I don't know why, but I turned. And thinking about it since, it wouldn't be fair to try to fill the gap. It could have been adjusting my backpack strap. I could have even looked down at my phone. But when I looked back, just seconds later, there was no one sitting there. I questioned whether I even saw anything at all because I saw someone and then they were gone.
So you don't think that there's ever been any convincing evidence for any of that?
No. But I think people believe there is, like people believe there's a Santa Claus. And so it becomes a powerful cultural phenomenon that makes some people believe they have that experience. In their mind, they've collected some evidence that amounts to that ghost experience.
Any staff person who worked on the third floor alone always felt like they were not alone. Some people would hear doors opening and closing. Well, the night of staying overnight, one of the gentlemen was a Wiccan. I guess he prodded too much. Talk to us, blah, 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 blah. And they heard a voice say, "Get out," and the door slammed. We had one of our staff people years ago used to come up and work on Sundays by herself. She was a children's librarian, and there was storage up here with a lot of the stuff that she would use for programming. So she'd come up here for hours and work by herself. She left us for 2 years and lived in Germany. She came back as the children's librarian and tried to do it again. She goes, and I felt they didn't want me around anymore. She goes, I just had this feeling of you no longer belong, get out. So whoever it was also, pretty possessive of the library, but who knows? One lunchtime, this woman comes to the desk here and she said, I'm very upset. I said, what's the matter? She goes, I want to complain about the children's librarian. I said, she's at lunch. No, she's not. She says, 3 times I've come up those stairs on different days, and she's run around the corner and gone into the front room, and then she disappears. I can't find her. I said, what does she look like? She says, well, she's about this tall. She's in contemporary slacks and a blouse, and she's got her hair in a bun. I laughed. I said, the next time you see her, say, Claire Robin said to go to the light. That children's assistant had passed away several years before, but she was seeing her as clear as day. So one day, in fact, I was sitting there and I saw her move from one side of the room to the other. There was a book on this shelf, and it was probably something like this size or this size, and it was standing, say, like this. Now, we were all right here. The book came off the shelf and stood right there. No one near it. A book that was sitting like this came off the shelf and landed like that. And when we came down, realized it was there, we could see they had dusted now, but there was little tiny handprints, fingerprints, right across the dust. So it was like someone had reached up.
As a cognitive psychologist, I have a couple of ways of thinking about this. One is what I would call a confirmation bias.
If we look at confirmation bias, that just says, right, that you've got an existing set of beliefs. So you may believe that ghosts exist, that there is such a thing as spirits or paranormal activity, and whenever you experience something that could confirm that belief, you're going to be like, well, that's evidence, right?
You believe you have to wear your special socks to play soccer this week because they're your lucky socks. So you believe that. It doesn't mean that it's scientifically true. It means you believe it. So you win your soccer game, and for you that's proof that the socks are, they're blessed with, good luck.
We tend not to pay attention to the times that our beliefs are not confirmed. And the times that they are confirmed stick out for us. They become more salient. And that is one way that I think a typical healthy person could easily find support for their beliefs in paranormal activity, in ghosts, etc. And I think that's one way to look at it. And I think that makes perfect sense.
People interpret evidence to the degree they believe that something exists, right? And so behind that is the anticipation, the expectancy that they will have that experience. And I think that's the way people think that there are these ghost entities that are out there that, I heard this thing, I feel this thing, I smell this thing, and and my conclusion is that it's a ghost that I believe in. So that's that expectancy effect or that confirmation effect, that people have this belief and they go seek evidence to confirm what they believe.
I truly believe if a spirit is hanging around all the time, they're troubled. There's a reason that they're hanging around.
I have no idea what ghosts are. I feel like it's definitely a person who was alive before. I don't know how it's possible, but I feel like there are just some people who can't move on or something and they just stay behind.
I don't know if I can define all ghosts or spirits or whatever per se as one sort of thing, because I've been told or I've read that there are different kinds of ghosts, like a sort of residual feeling, like a feeling left behind by something like intense anger or sorrow, or that those feelings sort of leave an impression and that energy remains.
The word ghost can be misleading because it conjures the image of someone hiding under a sheet. But I feel like a ghost is the memory of something that happened in the past.
And then there's other intelligent forms that I suppose you would consider that like a piece of the soul, if you believe in that. I do.
They're people that have died. They can't pass on for one reason or another. They haven't settled things in our life. So I guess that makes sense. But I don't know where they would go after they settle whatever they need to settle.
Personally, I think that there's a moment comes, I guess, when someone is dying or is like passing from this world to the next, when you have the opportunity to let go or to not let go. And I feel that some people may be incapable of letting go. Maybe they don't even know that they're dead.
I remember one day Alicia was upset because her crucifix was missing.
I had this crucifix that was from Jerusalem that my grandma gave me before coming here to keep beside my bed. And so I found one day that it was missing, that it wasn't where I normally put it. And we couldn't find it anywhere.
She looked under her bed, she looked between her covers, she looked on her desk, she looked under her desk, and it was nowhere to be found. It was lost. And she asked me if I would give her a hand. And I said I'd help. And the first thing I did was look under her bed.
It was underneath my bed, in the middle of underneath my bed, not touching anything, like somewhere we had looked previously, so we thought.
It was face down on the ground, right under where she would have been sleeping, directly in the middle, almost deliberately placed.
And the Jesus that was affixed to the cross was missing.
We ended up finding Jesus in the corner of the room, sort of under Alicia's bed, but off to the side, under the heater.
It was pretty uncanny because we were certain that we'd looked there before.
I'm Catholic.
Well, I was raised Catholic.
I don't really know what my religion is or what I believe for the afterlife.
Catholicism is generally viewed as one of the more superstitious religions. It's old, it's ancient.
I feel like I remember learning about ghosts in CCD because I remember talking about a show once with someone, like because the two of us like to go shows, and I remember my CCD teacher freaking out on us, saying like, you can't talk about those things, this didn't make any sense. So this is one of the things that really upset me. She was like, you're encouraging Satan by talking about ghosts, and I'm like, that doesn't make sense, but okay.
I think that being raised Catholic has opened up my mind to the idea that there are things out there that might be invisible to the human eye.
Some individuals have different locus of control. So some people have an internal locus of control, some people have an external locus of control. And what I mean by that is, if you have an internal locus of control, you feel as though you are in control of what happens to you. If you have an external locus of control, you feel that things that happen to you are outside of your control. And so those that have more of an external locus of control would tend to perhaps be more supportive of believing that ghosts exist. There definitely is a connection between an external locus of control and being a person who endorses faith or religion. I think also those with an internal locus of control can endorse faith or religion.
I know that the Catholic Church believes in spirits. Some may say, the Catholic Church believes in the Holy Ghost, and it ends there. And others agree with me that the Church encompasses things that are beyond our realm.
I think that there definitely is some similarity between a belief in a higher power, spirituality, and so perhaps a belief in ghosts, or we could be talking about an afterlife, right? And I think because in both instances, one could argue there's no scientific proof. They both are based on the idea of faith.
So the question is, why? Why do we still need ghost stories today when we have answers to so many questions? Well, one question we do not have an answer to is what happens after death.
There are so many things going on in this world. I'm more fascinated in the paranormal than I am afraid of it. I see it as an almost unattainable question, a question that can't be answered.
Thinking about death can be quite frightening. And we can separate that out to thinking about one's individual death or the death of a loved one. So if we start with this idea of thinking about your own death, it's frightening, it's scary, it's something we'd want to avoid because everything as we know would end. And isn't it much better to think about if what we know ends, there's another option, right? There's an afterlife.
I'm not really sure what happens when we die. But the one thing that I think I'm certain about is that there has to be something afterwards.
Dying and there being nothing is the most terrifying thing I can think of, which I think is why death really scares me, is because, yes, I believe in God and I believe in heaven, but like, if I were to die and there's nothing, that thought really terrifies me. Because then it's like, you won't even remember dying, you won't remember your life, you won't remember anything, there's just darkness. But even then, there's really no darkness because you're dead. So it's like, I think dying and just nothing is scarier than dying and being stuck here as a ghost.
If we shift to thinking about a loved one and a loved one's death, now that can happen in two ways, right? We can have loved ones that die unexpectedly, and so there's a lot of shock there.
My brother committed suicide in November. And my sister and I had to go back to his house and take care of a lot of business. While in that house, my sister and I are having a lot of conversations about what happened over the 40 years he lived in that house. And there's where I had that, I can remember we used to sit in this room and talk. I remember we used to sit on the back porch. And I remember, him working in the basement. And so that I felt that presence when I went back there. But those are my memories of my brother. That is, I did not believe that was his ghost there. But I think that reminiscence is that re-echo of those experiences. And I can see how some people would make that person alive in some way for them.
Or we can have loved ones that die after, say, some sort of a terminal illness, where there's a length of time where one spends thinking about, this is the inevitable, what will this mean? I think either situation is incredibly painful and incredibly different. But I think what's common in both is when we lose a loved one, we don't want to lose them forever. So we have memories, we have photographs, we have videos, but I think that there is something that eases the soul to speak. If we think about, there is a wonderful place for that person to go.
Does death scare you at all?
No. I think about it too much for it to scare me. I don't think there's any reason why it should. Like, everybody here is going to die. There's no need to be embarrassed about it. We're all in the same boat. Some die sooner than others, I suppose. I don't know. I think about it a lot. It doesn't really scare me. Because, you know, I have faith. I choose to believe that there will be something waiting for me on the other side. But if there isn't, there's nothing I can really do about it. So there's no use being afraid. Like, being afraid's not going to help me. I just don't see any use in being afraid of death.
If I could choose an ideal thing to happen after death, I like that Buddhism has reincarnation. I think that's a really cool idea, and if that were real, that would be really, really cool to be able to live again, because to me the idea of heaven, just being in an ideal place where everything's perfect, kind of destroys the point of living, because you need to work and do things that you like to make it worth it. And if everything's given to you, I don't see the point.
People that believe in, like, they are going to go somewhere after they die, I wonder what they think about when they fall asleep. Because the you that you think is you here and now, between there's you and here's me, and this is my personality and this is who I am, that disappears when you're in a coma or when you're asleep. It's like that self is gone. And then it comes back when you wake up in the morning. But so to some degree, I think that's what death is like. And there's nothing there. So when you die, that brain dies, that sense of self that's in your brain dies. It doesn't, I don't think, that's not a physical entity. It's probably why some people who are afraid to die have this optimism that there is going to be a self that exists after death. I don't believe that. I think when you're dead, it's like lights out.
If you thought that you die and there's just nothing at all, you wouldn't be afraid.
Time's up, I guess, you know? Oh, no, it doesn't scare me. Maybe it's because I love to sleep, and I like that sort of Shakespeare thing where it's like, is it, you know, to sleep perchance to dream. But then, you know, Hamlet's afraid because what dreams may come in death, and like he's afraid of the unknown. Like what if there is something, I think, is what he's afraid of. He'd rather there be nothing. I'll take it either way. I mean, like, I don't have much of a choice. None of us do.
My parents were very pragmatic. They sent me to church. I don't know if they made us kids be religious, but I don't think they really believed in it. I know my father didn't, and my mother was pretty stoic about everything. I remember her sister's husband died, my Uncle Harry. So my mom would visit his grave with her sister Louise, and Louise would act like she's talking to Harry, like she thinks he's there. My mother said to her, "I don't know why you're talking to the grave. There's nothing in there but a bunch of bones and shit." And that's kind of the way I feel about it. Yeah, that's not a person. That's not an entity. That's just a bunch of bones and shit in a box under 6 feet of dirt. And there's nothing precious or religious about that. For me, the real puzzle as a scientist is, and I'm a materialist, so I don't think I'm going to turn into a ghost. I don't think there's a God up in heaven. But what happens to this vital energy that we have as physics? Where does that go when you expire? I think there's the closest I would get to thinking about a ghost is like where that energy goes when you die.
There has to be something afterwards. Whether it's heaven or reincarnation, or our spirits wander, or whether there's darkness, but our souls become a part of the earth, become a part of the force that is the universe. When we die, we decay, and our bodies become part of the ground, and the ground
grows the grass, and the grass is eaten by cows who are slaughtered and eaten by people. And in that sense, even if there was nothingness, wouldn't we all live on?
If you believe that there's no afterlife, if you believe that when you die, that's it, that is very frightening. And I can easily see how an individual would say, what is the point of life? You could argue, well, the point may be to make things better for those that are still living in some way, that you can't change that you're alive. And so let's just have a great time and be as kind and helpful as possible. You could argue that. And I think, yeah, it is kind of scary to think about, what if nothing? What if that's it? You're a candle that's blown out. And it's more comforting to think, well, no, there's smoke, right? And that smoke's going to go somewhere and it's going to be totally different.
I think that the meaning of life, regardless of how you feel about death, is to just do what you can while you're here. And I'm trying to make the world a better place just by being who I am and trying to be good, like, for other people who are here. And maybe they'll get to reap the benefit after I'm gone, and maybe they won't, but then again, I won't be around to see it, so it won't affect me. So I'm not terribly frightened of that either. Even if we die and there's nothingness, that doesn't mean that life is futile. We have a legacy to create. As people, it's our job to enjoy our life from beginning to end. And no matter what you believe, it's important not to count on an afterlife. And it's important not to even count on tomorrow, because we don't know when our lives are going to end. And life is short, so I think it's our job and our duty to make the best of it.
I don't want to die, but I think you should be ready. You should live life so that you're ready to die. More people should think about that, yeah, in a deep way. About not just dying, but the value of life. You know, the experience of life every day, and not take that for granted.
I think making the world a better place, trying to find meaning is the meaning. Trying to make meaning while we're here.
The it is this. Life is this. It's not before, it's not after. This is it. The it of life is what you're experiencing right now, and you don't know what's going to happen next, really.
Walk around like upstairs.